The building had been empty for 11 years. Everybody in the town of Kellerton knew it. 3 stories of gray concrete, boarded windows, and silence. The kind of silence that makes the birds stop singing. A demolition crew arrived that morning. They had orange vests and coffee thermoses, and absolutely no idea what they were about to find. A worker named Pete swung a sledgehammer into the western wall of the basement. The first strike cracked the plaster. The second made the entire crew stop talking, because from inside the wall there was a sound, not a groan, not a pipe, something hollow, something shaped wrong. Pete swung again. The wall opened. Dust rose, and then Pete dropped his hammer. Inside the wall, sealed into the concrete like a secret, was a cavity. And inside that cavity was a small wooden box, and a woman's gold bracelet, and a photograph, and something wrapped in plastic that was once a human hand. Before we talk about what was found in that wall, we need to talk about the woman who put it there. Her name was Linda, and this is the story of everything she loved, everything she lost, and the one thing she chose to bury that was never supposed to stay buried. Kellerton was the kind of small town where everyone knew your coffee order, and your grandmother's maiden name. Linda Brown had lived there her whole life. 34 years old, a baker, a reader, a woman who still believed, stubbornly and completely, in the kind of love that makes everything else feel like background noise. Linda was behind the counter at 6:47 in the morning. Her apron had flour on the left shoulder and a small burn mark near the hem that she refused to throw away because her mother made that apron. Her hair was dark and pulled back, and she was humming something she could not name. She was not waiting for anything. That is important. Linda Brown was not a woman standing at a window watching for something better. She was satisfied. She was whole. This matters because what was about to happen to her is not something that happens to women who are desperate. The bell above the door rang at 6:52, and a man walked in. His name was Michael Jones. He was 40 years old, broad-shouldered, with a kind of face that looked like it had survived things it had never told anyone about. He smiled at Linda like she was the first piece of warmth he had stood near in a very long time. He asked her, "Do you have anything that didn't need to be a special occasion to eat?" Linda looked at him the way she looked at everything directly, without hiding, and said,
"Everything in the case is for a special occasion."
Michael Jones stared at her for a moment too long. Then he laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, the kind a person makes when they are genuinely surprised. He said he was celebrating not having burned his own breakfast for the first time that week. He asked what that got him. Linda gave him a blueberry scone. On the house, for surviving himself, he came back the next morning, and the morning after that. For 3 weeks, Michael Jones arrived at 6:52 every single day. Linda began saving him a scone before he walked through the door. She told herself it was good business. She was lying to herself, but it was a good lie. The kind that makes you walk faster. Their first walk together was not a date. That is what Linda told her best friend, a woman named Margaret, who had been Linda's closest companion since the 3rd grade, and who could see through every version of Linda's self-deception like glass. Margaret pointed out that Linda was wearing the green dress. Linda said she wore it all the time. Margaret reminded her she had worn it to her cousin's wedding and her mother's birthday. It was not, Margaret said, a park dress. Linda did not respond to that. She left. She wore the green dress. Michael was already at the park when she arrived. He had brought 2 coffees. He had remembered she took no sugar. Linda noticed this and tried not to let it matter as much as it did. They walked for 2 hours. They talked about everything that people talk about when they are secretly deciding if they trust someone where they grew up, what they lost, what they never let go of. Michael told her he had been divorced for 3 years, that he had moved to Kellerton for the quiet, that his work in construction had taken him across 4 states, and he had never once felt like he was home anywhere. He said he had started to think home was something some people just never get, like a radio station that only some receivers can pick up. Linda asked him what he thought now. Michael stopped walking. He turned and looked at her with a kind of steadiness that made Linda's chest feel tight. He said now he thought maybe he just needed to be in the right town. Linda Brown fell in love, the way sensible women always insist they will not, completely, and faster than she expected, and with her whole body involved in the decision. Michael moved his 3 boxes and his toolbox and his old dog. a gray muzzled retriever named Benson, into Linda's apartment on a Saturday in October. Margaret watched from the hallway with her arms crossed and said nothing. Later that night, when Michael had gone to get groceries, and it was just Margaret and Linda at the kitchen table, Margaret finally spoke. She told Linda that she did not know where Michael had been before Kellerton, that she had never met a single person from his life, that he had no photographs. Had Linda noticed that? No photographs, Linda said. Some people travel light. Margaret said some people travel light because they are running. Linda poured herself more tea and did not answer, because Margaret was right about the photographs. And Linda had noticed. She had simply chosen very deliberately not to pull on that thread. This is the thing about love. It does not make people blind. It makes them choose to look somewhere else. Michael proposed on a Tuesday, not a holiday, not a special restaurant, just a Tuesday evening in the community hall where Linda volunteered with the seniors reading program. He got down on one knee in front of 7 elderly people who started applauding before she had even answered. He told her he knew he was not easy to know, that there were things about him she had not been able to reach yet. But he asked her to build something with him anyway, because he had never been more certain of anything. Linda looked at him for a long time. She told him she would want to reach those things eventually. Michael told her he knew. He said he would let her in. He promised. She said yes. The 7 elderly people applauded louder. They married in March. Linda wore her mother's earrings. Michael wore a look that Linda had never seen on a person before, like a man who could not believe his own luck. For 14 months, they were the kind of happy that is embarrassing to be around. The kind that makes strangers in restaurants smile at them from across the room. And then, very slowly, like water finding its way through the smallest crack in concrete, things began to change. The first sign was the phone calls. Michael took them in the garage. Always the garage. He said it was because of the poor signal inside the house. The house had excellent signal. Linda had checked. The second sign was the trips. Michael did construction consulting. She understood that required travel, but the trips had become longer and vaguer. Columbus for a project, Denver for a client meeting, Nashville for a site visit, each time Linda asked for a number or an address. Michael smiled his steady smile and said she could always reach him on the cell. The third sign was harder to name. It was the way Michael looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching. Not with love, with something that felt more like calculation, like a man measuring the distance between where he was standing and the door. Margaret came into the bakery on a Wednesday and set her handbag on the counter with a particular firmness. That meant she had already made a decision before arriving. She told Linda she was going to say something Linda was not going to like. Linda told her then maybe not to say it. Margaret said it anyway. Her nephew worked for a title company in Harrow County. He had processed a property transaction the month before. A house 2 acres, purchased under the name M. Jones. Linda stopped wiping down the counter. Margaret continued. The house was listed as a primary residence, not an investment. A home, and it had been co-signed by a woman named Patricia Smith. The bakery was quiet for a very long time. Linda said that was a common name. Margaret said she knew what a common name was. She had pulled the full filing. There was a deed of trust. And on that trust, the beneficiary listed in case of death was their daughter. Her name was Rosie. She was 4 years old. Linda put down the cloth. She walked to the back of the bakery and stood at the wall with her hand pressed against it. Flat still, like she was trying to hold the building up from the inside. A 4-year-old daughter, a second home. A woman named Patricia Smith. Linda's husband, the man who had promised to let her in, had built an entire parallel life, with a door that Linda did not have the key to. Linda did not cry. This was not because she was strong. It was because she was too precise in her anger to afford tears yet. She sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, and she started writing down everything she could remember. Every trip, every phone call, every time Michael had been evasive about an address or a meeting. Her handwriting was steady. Her hand was not shaking. 2 hours into this, Linda realized something devastating. Not that her husband had betrayed her, she had begun to suspect that the moment Margaret spoke. What she realized was this: she had enough pieces that she could have figured this out a year ago if she had wanted to. She had chosen not to want to. She said it out loud, to the empty kitchen. I gave him time I did not have to give, because sometimes a person needs to hear the truth in their own voice to make it real. The next morning, Linda asked the librarian, a careful and discreet woman named Agnes, to help her access county property records. Agnes had worked in Kellerton for 26 years and understood that when a woman arrives at a library at 8 in the morning with her jaw set in a particular way, you do not ask questions. You help her find what she is looking for. What Linda found was this: Michael Jones had purchased the house in Harrow County 4 months before proposing to Linda. Patricia Smith had been living there for 3 years. The two of them had met while Michael was doing site work on a residential development. The same development where Michael had told Linda he had spent a long stretch getting the business off the ground. Rosie had been born 11 months after Linda and Michael's wedding. Michael had been at the hospital for the birth. He had told Linda he was in Pittsburgh for a drainage project. Michael Jones had not made a single mistake in 2 years. He had managed 2 lives, 2 women, and 1 small child with the precision of a man who had been planning this for a long, long time. And that was the thing that truly destroyed Linda. Not just that he had done it, but that he was so very, very good at it. 3 days later, Michael came home from what he called the Hargrove site. He kissed Linda on the cheek. He smelled like a house she had never been to. He sat down to dinner and asked about the bakery, and listened to her answers, with every visible sign of a man who cared. Linda watched him across the table. She watched him chew and laugh at his own small joke and reach over and squeeze her hand, and she made a decision. Not in a dramatic moment, quietly. The way all the most important decisions are made. She asked him how the Hargrove project was coming along. Good, Michael said. Slow. You know how these foundation pours go. You have to wait for the concrete to cure. Right, Linda said. The concrete. She smiled at him across the table. He smiled back. Neither of them knew what that smile would eventually cost. On a Saturday morning, Linda placed a manila folder on the kitchen table next to Michael's coffee. Inside the folder, property records, a photograph of the Harrow County house, a copy of Rosie's birth certificate, and a map with 2 locations marked this house, and that one with a red line drawn between them. Michael looked at the folder. He did not open it. He already knew what was inside. Linda told him she wanted him to look her in the eye and tell her what was in that folder. He sat very still. He started to say her name. Linda cut him off. She told him not to start with her name, to start with the truth. He looked at her for a long time, and then something in his face changed. Not guilt, something quieter and worse than guilt. Resignation, like a man who had always known this room existed and had simply hoped he would never have to enter it. Michael said her name was Patricia, that they had been together before Linda, that when he met Linda he had not ended things the way he should have, and that by the time he understood what he had done, there was a child involved. Linda told him to stop. She told him he was about to tell her a child was the reason he had maintained a second marriage. Michael said they were not married. Linda asked him if he had co-signed Patricia's mortgage, if he had listed himself as the father on a birth certificate, if he had spent 12 nights a month in a house with another woman and a little girl who called him. Linda stopped. She pressed her hand flat on the table. She asked him what the child called him. Michael said nothing. Linda asked again, Michael, what does that child call you? Daddy, Michael said. The kitchen was a held breath. Linda told him to get out of the house. Michael begged her to let him explain. Linda told him if he said one more word that was not goodbye, she would call Patricia Smith, right then, and ask her how she felt about her daughter's father having a wife in Kellerton. Michael stood. He looked at Linda, with something she had never seen on his face before. Not love, not guilt. Fear, he told her. She would not do that. He said the little girl, Linda, told him she would burn everything he built if he made her. She told him to get out. He got out. Linda Brown stood in her kitchen for 47 minutes after the door closed. She did not sit down. She pressed both hands flat against the counter and stared at the wall and breathed. Because breathing, when everything else is gone, is still something. Linda assumed the worst was behind her. She assumed this because she did not yet know what Michael Jones had done with the building. The building was a property at the north end of Kellerton, an old apartment complex, 3 floors, half a city block, empty for 11 years following a flood that had made it uninhabitable. Michael had been hired by a developer named Nelson Barra to assess the structure's viability for renovation. Linda had known about the project. It was the project that had first brought Michael to Kellerton. She had always assumed it was never finished. Michael had said the developer pulled out. The building had sat empty, but Linda's attorney, a dry, precise woman named Constance, called her with something she had found while processing the divorce paperwork. The development deal had not fallen through. It had been completed. The building had sold 18 months ago. Michael Jones had received a contractor's fee of $412,000. Linda told Constance that was not possible. Michael had told her the deal collapsed. He had told her he lost money on that assessment. Constance told her to sit down before she heard the rest. The buyer of that building, the person who received Michael's full assessment, including the structural reports, including every detail of that basement, was Patricia Smith. The room went very still. Linda asked her to say it again. Constance repeated it. Patricia Smith had purchased the Kellerton apartment complex 18 months ago, with Michael Jones as the co-signing contractor. The property was worth approximately $2 million. He had signed over his consulting fee as a direct contribution to the down payment. Michael Jones had used money that should have belonged to him and Linda money earned during their marriage to buy a building for another woman. He had not simply maintained a second relationship. He had been systematically, quietly, and with great patience, transferring his life from one woman to the other. Linda was not the woman he had chosen. Linda was the woman he had used while he built something for someone else. Linda sat in Constance's office for a very long time. Then she asked what was in the building right now. Constance told her nothing. It was still listed as empty. Patricia Smith had never done anything with it. She simply held the title. Linda nodded slowly. There was something moving behind her eyes that Constance could not quite name, not grief, not even anger. Something quieter and far more precise. Linda thanked Constance and told her that would be all for today. Linda Brown divorced Michael Jones in the spring. She kept the bakery. She kept the house. She kept Benson the dog because Michael had not thought to ask for him, and because Benson had slept at the foot of Linda's bed every night for 2 years and did not understand that a marriage had ended. What the town of Kellerton saw was a woman who had been hurt, who was healing, who made very good blueberry scones, and who smiled at her customers with something that looked very much like peace. What Margaret saw was something different. Margaret told her she was not angry enough. Linda told her she was exactly angry enough. Margaret said she should be screaming, throwing things. Instead, she looked like a woman making a plan, and that scared Margaret more than screaming would. Linda asked Margaret if she had ever thrown a pot of boiling water. Margaret stared at her. Linda told her to think about what was more dangerous, throwing it or aiming it. Margaret did not bring it up again. What the town of Kellerton did not know, and what nobody would know for 11 years, is what Linda Brown did with the Kellerton apartment complex. Patricia Smith had never visited the property. The building sat untouched. And Linda, who had spent 2 years married to a construction specialist, and who had listened very, very carefully every time Michael explained his work, knew more about that building's bones than Patricia Smith ever would. She knew where the structural hollow points were in the basement walls. She knew which sections of concrete had been poured thin during the original 1970s construction. Michael had pointed it out, proud of his knowledge, never imagining she was filing it away. Over several months, Linda purchased tools from 4 different hardware stores in 4 different towns. A chisel, a hammer, a drill. She bought concrete mix and sealed it in the back of her storage room behind bags of flour. One night, 4 months after the divorce, Linda entered the building. She worked quietly, methodically. The way she did everything. But here is what you need to understand. Linda Brown did not bury a body in that wall. This is not that kind of story. What Linda buried in a sealed concrete cavity in the basement of the building Patricia Smith owned was a box, and inside that box were the only documents in existence that could have connected Michael Jones to everything he had done. Not just to Linda, to all of it. Because Michael Jones was not simply a man who had built a second life. He was a man who had committed fraud across 3 states during his construction career. Fraudulent permits, diverted funds, a structural assessment he had falsified in Portland that resulted in a building collapse. 2 workers were injured. One of them permanently. Michael had covered everything. Every document, every filing, every piece of evidence, except one set of originals he had been too careless to destroy. The set he had stored in the east basement room of the Kellerton apartment building during the original assessment, because he had not yet decided what to do with them. Linda found those documents. She photographed every single page, and then she put the originals in a box, sealed them in concrete, and walked out of that building at 3:47 in the morning. She did not destroy the evidence. She did not hand it to the police. She buried it because Linda Brown understood something that most people never learn. The most powerful position is not to use what you have. It is to make certain that the other person knows you have it, and must spend the rest of their life wondering when you will decide to use it. Michael Jones came back to Kellerton on a Tuesday, 6 months after the burial. He sat in the diner and waited for Linda with the expression of a man who had rehearsed his lines extensively. Linda arrived at exactly the time she said she would. She sat across from him and folded her hands on the table. Michael asked if she had found anything in the building. Linda asked which building. Michael looked at her. He said her name. He said, "Please." Linda told him she did not know what building he was talking about. She said she was a baker. She made scones. She had not been inside a construction site since he left. Michael looked at her very carefully. He said if she had those documents, Linda told him that if she had anything of his, she would have returned it during the divorce. She asked if there was anything else. Michael sat for a moment longer. Then he stood. He had the look of a man who could not decide whether he had just won something or lost everything. He told her he was sorry for what he had done. He said he needed her to know he was genuinely sorry. Linda looked at him steadily. She told him she knew he was. She told him to enjoy his coffee. He left Kellerton that afternoon. He did not come back. Over the following 3 years, Michael Jones was investigated by 2 state licensing boards for construction fraud. Witnesses came forward. Former business partners cooperated. The original Portland case was reopened. Without the documents, without what Linda had buried, investigators could not prove the full extent. But they had enough. Michael Jones lost his contractor's license in 3 states. He lost the Harrow County house in civil proceedings. Patricia Smith cooperated fully with investigators and was found not to have known about the fraud. She and little Rosie relocated to her mother's home in Tennessee. Michael Jones went to work for a hardware company in Idaho. He was 62 years old. He stocked shelves. Linda heard this through Constance, who heard it through colleagues who tracked the proceedings. Linda was behind the bakery counter when Constance called. She listened. She nodded. She said, "Thank you, Constance." And then she finished icing a cake. 11 years passed. Linda Brown ran the best bakery in Kellerton. She expanded, added a small reading nook in the back corner, hired 2 assistants, a young woman named Kayla, and an older man named George, who had lost his job at the mill and who turned out to be exceptional at bread. She did not remarry. She was not unhappy. She had Margaret, and Benson lived to 14 and was buried under the oak tree in her backyard, and the bakery was full every morning, and Linda slept well. This is a thing worth saying plainly. Linda Brown slept well. The demolition crew found the cavity in the Kellerton apartment complex on a Thursday morning. The news traveled through Kellerton, the way news always does in a small town. By 11 a.m., it had reached Linda's counter. George was the one who told her. He had heard it from the mail carrier. He said they had found something in the old building wall, a box, some papers, and a hand, preserved somehow. Everyone was saying it was a murder case. Linda looked up from the counter. "A hand," she repeated. George said that was what they were saying. Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she told him it was a mannequin hand. She told him she put it there. An old department store mannequin, she said. Very lifelike, very old. She found it in the building and thought it would be funny to seal it in the wall. She said she had been going through a difficult time. George stared at her. Linda asked if he wanted a scone. The detective handling the discovery, a methodical woman named Sandra, made 2 phone calls before 5 p.m. The first was to the demolition company to confirm the site permit. The second was to a woman she had found through property records. The second call went to Linda Brown. Detective Sandra told her she understood the property had formerly belonged to a Patricia Smith, and that Linda had previously been married to a man connected to the property. Linda confirmed that was correct. Detective Sandra told her they had found documents in the sealed cavity. Fraud-related documents that appeared to connect to a case prosecuted several years ago. A Michael Jones, Linda said she saw. Detective Sandra continued, the documents had now been formally entered as evidence. They might allow investigators to reopen 2 charges that were previously unprovable, including one related to the Portland collapse. One of the workers who had been injured was still living. Linda sat very still with the phone. Detective Sandra asked her directly, Miss Brown, did you know those documents were in that wall? A pause. Linda told her she was a baker. She said she had flour on her apron right at that moment. She said she had not been inside a construction site in 11 years. Detective Sandra said she understood. She thanked Linda for her time. Linda set the phone down. Margaret was at the kitchen table. She still showed up on Thursdays, had for 30 years. She was looking at Linda with an expression that was not quite a question. She asked if that had been about the building. Linda said yes. Margaret asked what they had found. Linda looked at her best friend. The woman who had known her since 3rd grade, who had seen her in the green dress that was not a park dress, who had stood at the counter of the bakery 11 years ago and told her the truth when Linda did not want to hear it. Linda smiled. She told Margaret they had found exactly what was supposed to be found, when it was supposed to be found. After the man who needed to fall had already fallen far enough that the landing would stick. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. She reminded Linda of something. Linda had always said she would let Michael in eventually. Linda had said that on the phone the very night she kicked him out. She had said Michael promised to let her in and never did. Linda said yes. Margaret asked her directly, Linda, did you plan this? All of it? From the beginning, Linda stood. She picked up her apron from the hook by the door. She tied it behind her back. She told Margaret she had planned a life with a man who did not deserve one from her. She said the rest she had improvised. But concrete is patient, she said. You just have to know when to pour it and when to wait for it to cure. She walked back into the bakery. Outside, a delivery truck was pulling up. The morning flour had arrived. The day was beginning the way it always did, with something to make, something to offer, and a woman who knew exactly what she was doing.